and welcome to a new episode of the Weekly Defense Podcast. This week, brought to you in partnership with our sponsor Lockheed Martin. I'm your host, Alex Valenti, and with me today are news editor Ben Vogel and senior land reporter Tim Fish. Hi, guys.
Good evening.
Hi, Alex. It's been a while since I've been on this.
Yeah, exactly. It's great to have you back, Ben. So how is everything going with the preparations for DSEI coming up in 2 weeks?
I'll tell you something, if I hadn't lost most of my hair already, I think I'd be well on the way. But it's going to be interesting. First in-person trade show for many of us in practically 2 years. So it should be a good one.
Yeah. I think we've all been looking forward to it very much. Counting the days. I know I'm counting the days. And Tim, we heard that in New Zealand you're on lockdown again. So I'm really sorry you won't be able to join us.
Yeah, that's right. It's been a couple of weeks already, and we're looking forward to at least another 2 weeks. So yeah, it's a bit frustrating, but hopefully they'll sort it out and we can open up again as soon as possible.
Wow, let's hope so for you guys. So this week we're going to be, since we're talking about shows, this week we're going to be continuing on the same format from last week. Last week we delved into details on the main reveals of IDEF 2021. And this week instead we're going to be looking at another show which took place on Russian soil and share with you some of our favorite stories on what happened at Army 2021 in Moscow last week. And later in the show, as the UK still works on its space strategy, we speak to the UK Space Agency to look at the country's future operations in this growing domain. And now, before we discuss the highlights from Army 2021, as always, let's have a look at the headlines from this week. And the United States has sealed the end of a 20-year war in Afghanistan on 31st of August when the final US aircraft took off from Kabul airport. In a statement on Monday night, the US President Joe Biden said, quote, "The past 17 days have seen our troops execute the largest airlift in US history, evacuating over 120,000 US citizens of our ally and Afghan allies of the United States," end quote. The US last flight followed the last UK evacuation, which took place on Saturday, the 28th of August. Elsewhere in the world, China is making a real effort in showcasing its UAV designs with operations that could be pushing too close to the borders of its own territory. On 24th of August, the Japanese MoD stated that a Chinese TB-001 male UAV flew near Japanese borders. The news caused some skepticism among experts as the UAV, also known as Twin-tailed Scorpion, is not believed to have entered service in the People's Liberation Army yet. Over in the UK, 4 new consortia have signed new contracts of about £5 million each to develop their fleet solid support ship designs. The announcement made by the MoD on 1st September suggests that these 3 new vessels are required for the Royal Fleet Auxiliary under the FSS program to support the Royal Navy Carrier Strike Group. And finally, Babcock International and Hyundai Heavy Industries have signed a memorandum of understanding to foster collaboration on the development of the Republic of Korea's CVX aircraft carrier program. Work is expected to officially start in 2022 and be completed by 2033 if the program is approved. And this concludes the headlines from this week. Now, let's have a look at what happened at Army 2021. And Ben, I'd like to start with you, if that's okay. I think you're going to be talking to us about some man-on-man teaming. What's going on?
A little bit, yeah, but let me first introduce a story from our correspondent Alex Tarasov, who attended Army 2021 last week. And despite the name Army 2021, there were clearly a few aviation elements to the show. And one of them was the news that the Russian MoD was placing a contract for the first batch of Ka-52M helicopters, and that's a modernised version of the Ka-52 Alligator.
Right, and so how is this significant?
I mean, it's significant, I think, for 2 reasons, mainly. Number one, this is a first batch of aircraft in a long-term framework contract from the Russian MoD, and eventually they're going to be 114 of these modernised Alligators provided to Russian Army aviation. And secondly, the Ka-52M is one of 2 really cornerstone helicopter programs in the Russian 2018 to 2027 state armament program, and the other one being the Mi-28 NM helicopter.
Right. Okay. So what are the main differences between the KA-52 and the modernized variant?
Well, it seems that the upgraded Alligator is going to have new power supply and target detection systems. But the main innovation, it seems, in the new aircraft is its navigation and target acquisition system and an upgraded communication system allowing manned-unmanned teaming demonstrations with reconnaissance UAVs. And if all of these things do sort of mesh together, it seems that the KA-52M would be a valuable asset for Russian ISR and long-range strike missions, if it does what it says on the tin, of course.
Right. And as we've seen with Russia before, we never know how this may evolve in the future.
The writing on the tin can be a little bit unclear.
Yes. And so what are the next milestones for this program?
Well, the first KA-52M delivery is expected next year, so 2022. I mean, that's assuming that the helicopter successfully completes joint state trials, which began last month. And meanwhile, Russian Helicopters manufacturer has begun to prepare for serial production at the AKK Progress plant in Arsenyev.
So at least they're quite positive that they're going to pass state trials.
Yeah, they're always very positive about that sort of thing.
That's good for them. So, if I understand correctly from the story, I had a quick look at it as well. The KA-52M was shown at Army 2021 with, and I may butcher this, so apologies, with the Isdeli 305 missile. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. I mean, it's also known as the LMUR Light multi-purpose guided missile, but right. We call it the Isdeli for brevity, I suppose. And yes, there was another story from a different freelancer at the show, Alexander Petrenko, focusing on this missile, the Isdeli 305. And the significance of this was that Army 2021 was the first occasion that the Isdeli 305 was put on public display. Although there are strong indications that it has already previously been used in action in Syria. But it looks as though the missile has received an official export certificate from the Russian government because Alexander noticed that it was shown with the designation 305E, so E for export.
And do we have a sense of who this could be exported to, who could be the possible customers?
No indications as yet. I mean, the fact of the designation clearly indicates that Rosoboronexport will be trying to push it to the export market, although there are no confirmation yet of any customers.
Yeah, it'll be intriguing to see what happens there. And speaking of intriguing, so why is this new missile, well, not so new anymore, but missile intriguing for the Russians?
Well, it does appear to be some kind of a step forward because this new missile, the Isdeli 305, it could reduce or remove a reliance on second-generation Attacker or Vickers anti-tank guided missiles that are currently in the Russian Army helicopter arsenal. Those older types, those second-generation ATGMs, they make Russian attack helicopters slightly vulnerable because of their limited launch range and because they require the missile to be tracked from launch to impact by the helicopter operator. Isdeli 305 appears to be able to be launched from further away and without that necessary tracking on the part of helicopter crew, which would obviously free them up to deal with any threats.
Yeah. Keep the crew out of harm's way. Do we have information on what the range is, or is that also part of not what's on the tin?
I think that's part of what's not on the tin. Although I did ask for system specifications from people, but sometimes, obviously, especially in Russia, giving out details of these kind of missiles is slightly difficult. However, there are some indications that the range of the missile is about 14.5 kilometers, and it can be fired from an altitude of between 100 and 600 meters. So kind of low altitude, but a longer range than the Vickers or Attacker.
Yeah. Yeah, let's see again another one. Let's see how that develops and what actually does happen once it's fitted on platforms and being used. So thanks very much for all this, Ben and Tim. I understand you have a few land stories to share with us as well on what happened at Army 2021.
Yeah, that's right. One of the freelancers, Alex Tarasov, has written a few interesting pieces about some land systems equipment that was at the show. The first one is about two new variants of the Typhoon 4x4. The company that built them, called Rem Diesel, displayed two of them. One's the ZASPN vehicle designed for reconnaissance and special forces missions. The other one is the AMND multi-purpose utility vehicle.
And do we have more specifications about these vehicles? Anything interesting that stands out?
Well, both can be parachuted or transported by aircraft and helicopters. This is quite important because they're destined for the Russian Airborne forces, and they're currently on trials, but it's unclear as yet if these two will enter service. There are a lot of Typhoon vehicles out there already. They're variants of the original Typhoon K. The Russian Airborne troops are getting the Naparnik 4x4 armoured escort vehicle supposedly by the end of this year. That means that it's going to provide better mobility and minor ballistic protection than the existing BTR-82 on personnel carriers that they have at the moment for less weight than what's already in the infantry.
Okay. So you mentioned this was for the Russian Airborne forces?
Yes, Russian Airborne forces are one of the Russian Army's specialist units. The Russian Army doesn't have special operations command like in the way that the US does, the way that we in the West think about it. Their specialist units are attached to other divisions, attached to other units. They have specialist roles performing for the Army, including advanced motorized divisions that perform the reconnaissance. So if you think of it like that, and the Russian Airborne is one of those particular types of units, then it is an expansion in what is a kind of small part of Russia's expeditionary capability. Russia is not an expeditionary military. They don't have forces that can go very far beyond their own borders. So when you are upgrading the units of the airborne forces, that isn't to be sort of flying long distances. They are used for sort of occupying airports and things that are relatively close by, so they can then drop in larger, more heavily armed units to follow, potentially the size of a brigade, maybe. So that's kind of their role, and that's kind of quite a key part of Russia's army strategy to get behind enemy lines by doing that.
Right. Although you could almost argue that given the size of their own country, it's almost like going far deep into a territory when you have to travel across the country.
Well, Russia's got the longest land border in the world, so if you think of it, you say they're not expeditionary, but considering it's 1/8 of the world's landmass in one country,
yeah,
they've got a pretty good base from which to launch airborne forces from, and that could be almost anywhere along that border. So if you think of it like that, then they have got actually quite a good range of places they could be put into.
Can I just add that on the Rem Diesel side of things, the company that makes Typhoon, the Typhoon range, there do appear to be one or two sort of operational, sort of practical production problems which will affect the output of the vehicle, because apparently the claim is that Rem Diesel can churn out about 300 armoured vehicles of all types per year. That was a claim that was also reported by TASS last year. But last year they only produced 250 armoured vehicles for the Russian MoD. I mean, that's at a time when protected vehicles are really in high demand for the Russian ground forces. And I think one of the reasons why Rem Diesel's been struggling and Russian manufacturers also have encountered some difficulties. It's not just COVID affecting the production last year and this year, but also because they're finding it difficult to get substitute materials and components domestically because international sanctions and other restrictions have made it difficult to do so. Only about 70% of Rem diesel armoured vehicle components are domestically produced. And that's according to a Russian MoD official that was quoted in a story from Alex earlier this year.
Right. Thanks, Ben. Thanks very much for these additional details. It's very interesting. And Tim, to get back to you, so what are the stories that you want to share with us today?
The one I found the most interesting was Alex's story on Russia's Arctic capability with the display of 2 new all-terrain vehicles on a special Arctic stand, apparently, that was put out at Army 2021. The two new ATVs that were displayed was one called the DGTS, which is based on the GAZ 224420 tracked articulated transporter, and a BT3F tracked amphibious APC, which has been adapted for the Arctic, so that it can work in sort of minus 50 temperatures, and has also got a manned aerial system stuck on the top. It was in an APC configuration, but apparently there are other variants that can fit more armaments on them. This is quite interesting because it's improving the capability to operate in the Arctic region. The Arctic region is very important for Russia, increasingly so because of the opening of the northern waterways. There's more resources there that they need to protect, and they think 20, 30 years in advance. And the difficulties of building stuff in the Arctic is it takes that long to get things established, especially if you've got sort of gas facilities there, minerals, extraction, that kind of stuff. So you have to start thinking about that now. So they're thinking ahead to what would the West likely be doing in that sort of time frame, and they're kind of working on it now. And these vehicles are there to support operations in that area. They've already, set out sort of north radars out into the north, and radar pickets protected by short-range air defense systems. This is kind of showing how important it is. The Russian army's gone through a huge transition process over the last few years in the way it's organized. The structure was based on 4 military districts. Russia's divided into 4 military districts, and then they created a 5th one, which is based out of the Northern Fleet headquarters, and it's the 4th one, which is the Northern District, and that is focused on the Arctic itself, indicating that they see it as a very important strategic area, considering that the US is just on the other side of the Arctic north.
Yeah. No, you're right. I mean, I was looking also at what Russia was up to in the Arctic, and in August they'd also launched, the Northern Fleet had kicked off a large-scale exercise, training exercises on land, sea, and air. So there's definitely plenty going on there. And as you said, it's we all know that the ice is melting, but it's not melting. Probably not fast enough for Russian strategic purposes, but they're looking ahead, and other Western countries are thinking about it, aren't they? I mean, we've seen a few Arctic patrol vessels and other equipment aimed at operating in the Arctic, but they're definitely not as advanced as Russia in that domain.
That's right. Other countries have fallen a bit behind. We mentioned it in a few podcasts back in April or May, where back in March 2021, the US Army released its strategy paper entitled Regaining Dominance in the Arctic, highlighting all the challenges faced by the US Army in the era of great power competition, the urgent need to modernize its equipment. It's recognized quite belatedly that this is an area of contention, and has started its own cold weather all-terrain vehicle program to modernize its Alaskan-based brigade combat teams and replace older BV-2A6R ATV vehicles. So Russia's looking at this, and so is the US, and even Sweden, Germany, Netherlands, and the UK looking at replacing their BVS-10s with a new ATV program as well. So on the land side, ATVs are the way forward if you're going to be operating the Arctic on land. You're not going to be having huge sort of armoured manoeuvre across ice. that's going to be rather too difficult. So it will be an air and naval campaign, whatever happens if it gets pretty hot up there. But there will be some manoeuvre of land forces, and this is what they're, particularly logistics, transport, in moving equipment around, particularly air defence stuff, and as well as other equipment. So this is what these guys are going to be they're doing.
Yeah. Well, I guess the Arctic could be the topic of a whole podcast in itself, isn't it? But I just wanted to check with you if you had more information on this new Arctic vehicle, or if there was another story you wanted to share with us.
There was one other story actually that cropped up that I thought was pretty interesting to mention. It's Alex's again. He's written about a manufacturer, military industrial complex, or otherwise known as VPK, producing two new 4x4s. One's a soft skin Strela VPK KBM multi-purpose vehicle that is going to replace the existing UAZ 469 light utility vehicle, which was first introduced in the 1970s, which are kind of comparable to Western Land Rover Defenders. The Strela vehicle is part of a Russian MoD experimental program, which is looking for more light armored amphibious, buggy, and light unarmored vehicle variants. So they're really trying to modernize their fleet of smaller 4x4 vehicles to get them up to standard. That's because the Russian ground forces lack light protected vehicles weighing less than 5 tons. So this is a part of a move to start replacing some of the really old vehicles they got in their fleet. And that goes for the second platform, which VPK has shown at the show, which is an amphibious platform, which is also classed as an armoured reconnaissance vehicle, which is designed to replace the 1960s vintage BRDM amphibious scout car. There aren't any actual plans to replace the BRDM, but it looks like they kind of need to. They need more ergonomic vehicles and need more protection, and it needs to be suitable for the digital era. The thing is, when you look at these vehicles, you think, an amphibious vehicle, you've got like a multi-purpose vehicle. The Russian army is not designed, as I mentioned before, to be expeditionary. It's designed to work primarily on its own territory. They expect a NATO attack on Russia, and they expect to have to retreat and then launch a counterattack. So these vehicles are actually designed to work on Russian territory. This is what they train for when they do their exercises, and you hear about them doing manoeuvres on the borders of their own country. They're actually practicing being attacked and then launching a counterattack. So it's about withstanding an initial assault and then launching this counterattack over their own territory to take back the land and to move on. So an amphibious vehicle isn't designed as we might think to launch from the sea, from amphibious platforms and that kind of thing. And they're actually looking at maneuvering through swamps, through rivers on their own territory. And that's what an amphibious vehicle and also is designed to do, and also to have light vehicles to do advanced motorized recce as well for their artillery units.
Oh, thanks for this. And as I recall, amphibious warfare is your specialty. So thanks for sharing some of the extra thoughts on this with us. And unfortunately, we're going to have to wrap it up. But Ben, do you have any additional thoughts, anything you want to share with us? Comment on what Tim was just saying?
Just on Russian armoured platforms, there was a bit of news that actually emerged slightly before Army 2021. So might be a little bit too old for this podcast, but worth mentioning the saga of the T-14 Armata, and one of those tanks, I think, was on display at Army 2021. There was finally an announcement that the Russian ground forces will receive their first batch of 20 series production Armata T-14s by the end of the year, which basically, if true, and we still have to sort of take it with a pinch of salt at the moment, if true, it would sort of mark the culmination of quite a long program. Before the first delivery, because the contract was signed in 2015, and there was talk originally of the Armata arriving in 2018. However, there have been a number of technical problems and procedural issues in terms of fulfilling the contract. But it appears that the first 20 will arrive by the end of the year.
20, well,
Yeah, exactly.
that's really going to change the balance of power, right? When you look at how many tanks they have overall of different types, 20 doesn't really cut it, I'm afraid. So they'd have to really ramp that up to hundreds a year for the next few years, really. But yeah, I'll be interested to see how that actually develops.
Yeah. As many other things Russian, we stay tuned and let's see what happens. So thanks very much, guys, for this little tour of the show that happened in Russia. And for our listeners, as always, you can check these and more stories, previous episodes of the podcast, video content and more by visiting our website, shepherdmedia.com/news. We will now go into a short break and we will be back in a few moments with creative director Tony Skinner, who recently sat down for a chat with Ian Annett at the UK Space Agency to talk about Britain's goals in future space launch operations. Stay tuned.
Artificial intelligence is rapidly changing the world in which we live. Evidence of artificial intelligence is all around us and will have profound implications on everyday life in the decades to come. In the military world, artificial intelligence technologies are having a similarly massive effect and are beginning to change the face of modern warfare. Artificial intelligence and machine learning applications promise to enhance productivity, reduce user workload, and operate more quickly than humans. But this doesn't come without its challenges. How easy is it for an adversary to fool artificial intelligence systems? How well do AI systems cope with a chaotic and ever-changing conflict? And how will the human in the loop oversee AI systems on a battlefield swarming with autonomous assets? The Artificial Intelligence on the Battlefield podcast dives into these issues and more. How will artificial intelligence reshape the future of warfare? Created by Shephard Studio in partnership with our sponsor Sistel, the Artificial Intelligence on the Battlefield podcast on shepherdmedia.com/news or wherever you get your podcasts.
Greetings, listeners. This is Tony Skinner, Creative Director here at Shepherd Media. Recently, I sat down for a chat with Ian Annett, who is the Deputy Chief Executive at the UK Space Agency. We wanted to discuss the prospects of there being a future space launch capability from the UK and what this might mean for both the commercial and military space sector. And here's that conversation now.
I'm Ian Annett and I'm the Deputy Chief Executive here at the UK Space Agency.
So I guess the big hook that we're sort of looking at is the chance for future space launch operations from the UK. I mean, to start off with, before we get into the details of that, perhaps you could give us an idea of, how important that ambition is to sort of achieve that goal.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you look at the small sat market across the globe, it's worth $14 billion a year now. And that's an important part of the global economy to get hold of. The number of orbital launches that have occurred just this year, there's a rapid rise in interest in the launching of small sats for a whole host of reasons, really. Some of that being economic, some of it being security related. But if you just look at the figures on it, back in 2012, there was some 52 small satellites launched, yet in 2019 there were almost 400. So the opportunity for the UK to get after some of that market will be both a benefit for the economy, but also fill that important gap for us, whereby the UK is great at designing satellites, it's fantastic at manufacturing, particularly small satellites, and then exploiting the data and operating and then exploiting the data. Gap in the market for us at the moment is really about that launch piece. And if we really want that assurance and that independence, then it's really, really important for us to try and develop a launch capability for the UK.
Perhaps you could summarise, where we are in terms of the current status of that ambition, and what are the sort of the key projects we should look out for in terms of, that being taken forward.
So the government, through the agency, has funded a number of projects to develop spaceports in the UK. We've got Lockheed Martin, who are working very close with a launch vehicle provider, ABL, and also Shetland Spaceports to deliver a vertical launch capability in 2022. We're also working very closely with Highlands and Islands Enterprise in Sutherland and Orbex as a UK rocket manufacturer in order to develop a complementary vertical launch capability in Scotland as well. Alongside that, we're working in a fascinating area of horizontal launch as well. So we have been funding some work that Virgin Orbit have been doing with us with Launcher One, which means that we can access orbits from launching a rocket underneath a 747, which means that you can move that asset around. You're not fixed to a particular point. So that gives, again, a kind of a complementary capability. I don't see these really as being in competition with each other. They have different offerings, whether it be the size of spaceport, the size of launch vehicle they've got, or indeed, the access to different different orbits and planes, and also different payloads that they can raise into orbit as well.
I mean, you did touch on the economic benefits, but perhaps we could sort of dive into that in a bit more detail about what this would mean from an economic benefit point of view to the UK. If we saw, you just outlined, I guess, 3 efforts there. If one or all 3 of those were to really get off the ground, no pun intended, what would the economic benefits potentially be for the UK?
Well, so the economic benefits are one aspect of it. And when we do the maths, we probably would see that there's shy of £1 billion in terms of gross value added over the next decade into the economy for a relatively small outlay from government. But then that's you then got to think about the other spin-offs beyond that in terms of the support activities that take place, the thought leadership that brings to the UK in terms of further design around launch vehicles or indeed launch facilities. But then I kind of go back to what I said as well. It's not just about the economic benefits. You have to look at, I think, in a couple of other areas as well. First of all, access to space. And whilst there's no defined policy for sovereign capability at the moment, it does offer the opportunity of having assured access to space. If for disaster relief or for other needs, you need to be able to get eyes on early through Earth observation or fill the hole from a comms perspective, it offers you that flexibility. But also, by being a responsible operator in space, it also gives us a clear voice at the global level as well. So when we're looking at areas such as operating within the UN and the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space, we want to be able to call out bad behaviour. Now, one of the best ways to do that, of course, is demonstrating you yourself are a responsible operator in space. So having responsible launch operations governed from the UK, operated from here, that gives us a global voice, as well as providing us with an assured access to space, but then also offering economic benefit into the UK as well.
Yeah, so I guess, I had a question about opportunities, which I think you've outlined there quite well. I am wondering about the technologies that will be developed around this. I mean, I guess it's just the physical effort of launching something into space, which is an effort of itself. What other sort of technologies or innovation do you envisage being fostered just by the virtue of having a spaceport located in the UK?
Obviously, there is the most attractive element about it, the visual appearance of things being launched into space and the technology that surrounds that. So whether that be control systems, propulsion systems, aerodynamics around that, then, and again, the intellectual effort that requires, and therefore the skills that's brought into the UK. That's a kind of an obvious part to it. The other elements that are involved with it are, again, around how do you operate that from the UK? You need range services. You need infrastructure from which to operate that from. You need to have a sound set of mature regulations within which to operate legally as well. So all of those aspects demand skills and experience that will help to make us a responsible operator in space. Nothing happens without the right regulations in place. And the UK's gone a long way to ensuring that we've got flexible, forward-looking regulations in order to enable launch and also operate in space responsibly, ensuring that if we do legislate and license operators, we put in place clear guidelines and legislation that, for example, says that, well, you need to be able to deorbit something if needs be. Again, back to that kind of responsible behaviour. So it's not all about things that you can see that go off the launch pad or off the rail of a 747. It's all those surrounding elements. So just equally as important as the rocket itself.
And I guess we've seen the launch of the, again, no pun intended, the creation of the new space commands in the MoD. I mean, are there any plans for sort of joint operations, collaboration, cooperation between the two agencies for this to be a kind of unified effort?
Absolutely. I describe the growth or the ubiquity of space as being a growing pie, and it's kind of not about slicing the same pie in different ways. You've got to work out how you can kind of get your arms around that whole pie together. So space, as I said, is becoming ubiquitous for all, whether it be for society, whether it be for security, or whether it be for economic growth. And therefore, we've got to work out how, as an agency and as a government, we create a coordinated and coherent approach across all government departments. And from an MoD perspective, then their direct function, their Department of State function is fulfilled by Director Space, who sits within the MoD. But actually how they generate the capability and develop that capability and then ultimately operate that capability, that needs to sit in a command, which will be Space Command. And joining Space Command and the agency in terms of where there are dual use capabilities is absolutely the right thing to do. My kind of personal view is I think that the days of single use capabilities in space are probably behind us. And therefore we're looking at how we can use capabilities. MoD's ISR is a civil Earth observation capability. And similarly with position, navigation and timing and communications as well. Not in every case, but there's definitely an overlap, and therefore there's definitely an opportunity to be coherent about addressing some of those dual capabilities. And that's better value for defence and for civil space, but also for the government.
I know you've had a military background yourself, and I don't expect you to speak on behalf of the MoD in any way, but I'm just wondering in general terms, and not even just in the UK, but the coalition sort of Five Eyes NATO basis, how has space operations increased in importance in terms of military context? I mean, how have you seen that in your career from when you sort of first started out to sort of today?
I mean, certainly in my career, it's always been important, but its importance has increased as I went through my career from a military perspective. And I think probably I'd characterize it as when I first joined the military, then the services that you drew from space were really for strategic communications alongside other communications that you had. Now it becomes the backbone of that communications, but it's not just communications. It's about everything that's digital, whether it be imagery, whether it be battlefield information, or whether it be communications. The key for MoD now, I think, is making sure that you can integrate all of those capabilities together. So space is not necessarily just a comms capability in its own. It's that kind of backbone upon which you conduct all of your operations. And getting that to work together, that the kind of multi-domain integration, as MoD would now call it, is really, really, really important. And space can enable that. That's a really, really important point to recognise. But almost we've got to work. So the UK has also got to be able to recognise that, of course, space is a vulnerability. So having breadth and depth of capabilities across space is kind of also important. I mean, it's quite interesting that we now start to talk about putting data back over HF again. Not at the same rate that you could do over space comms, but actually it's a great backup. And that's almost a flip of where it was 30 years ago.
Yeah, I guess just finally, I mean, what did I forget to ask you? What else would you like to mention or to cover?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd probably come back to the point that services from space are ubiquitous to all and yet unrecognised by many. I come from a maritime background, and I used to have the narrative that 95% of all trade by volume coming to the UK comes by sea. People don't know that. The kind of sea blindness was what we used to refer to it. And I think similarly in the space domain as well, that people don't realise that when they go to an ATM or a cash point, or they go to the shops, or indeed they're using their car, they intuitively know that it's on their phone or whatever, but they don't recognise the services that they're dependent on within space. And it's almost like a space blindness. And therefore, really, it's really important to make sure that people are aware how dependent they are on space services. And it's really, really important for us as government to ensure that we can assure those services so we don't end up with a catastrophic black swan event where we lose them all. And therefore, we have an impact on both society and the economy and also security. So that's a really, really important part of space, is that we need to use it and really, really leverage off it. But we've also got to look at those alternatives that will ensure that we can continue to develop the economy, maintain our security, and provide people a good life if we start to lose those services.
Excellent. Yeah, it's a really, really, really good point. Ian, thanks very much for your time. Just incidentally, I know you're a Skynet guy, a Skynet program manager.
Oh, well, I was the program director for Skynet. So
I was at the I went to the launch of Skynet 5A many years ago.
Oh, gosh, yeah, wow. Was that in Kourou?
There was. So the fact that we had to travel all the way to French Guiana to see that one, and I know that's a slightly bigger bus that was being launched, but yeah, it certainly gave me something I'll never forget, was the importance of just getting that thing in the air.
Yeah, I've not been to Kourou. I've been to the Cape for a couple of launches, but you never forget your first one. How impressive it is.
Yeah, and I know, we're talking small satellites, but to have that kind of capability in the UK would be amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, it is. I mean, again, the fact is that geography dictates what we access. Where we are with northern latitudes, it's really, it's not impossible, but it's really expensive to try and get into geostationary orbit, or geostationary transfer orbits. So the ones that our geography lends us to is those sun-synchronous and polar orbits, which really then means you're talking about small sats anyway. If you wanted to go for those larger ones, for example, that Kourou can access and ESA, you need to have something a little bit closer to the equator. And people talk about all kinds of ideas about using British overseas territories as well, but that comes with a whole host of legal complexities as well as technical ones as well.
Awesome. Ian, on that note, I'll let you disappear. I really appreciate it.
Brilliant. All right. Thank you very much.
From your home office to out at sea to on mission, Shephard News is used by more than 4 million government, military and industry professionals across the globe. So what are you waiting for? Start your 14-day free trial to premium news and join ranks with those in the know. Head to shepherdmedia.com/subscribe today.
This episode of the Weekly Defense Podcast was brought to you in partnership with our sponsor Lockheed Martin. As always, a big thanks to everyone who took the time to be with us today. For our listeners, if you enjoyed the show, please make sure you like and subscribe, leave a review on iTunes, Spotify, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts from. Until next week, thanks for listening.